The meadow stretched endlessly before her, a tapestry of wildflowers that swayed in the warm breeze like waves upon a golden sea. Persephone moved through this ocean of petals with the grace of one who had never known sorrow, her fingers trailing across the soft heads of poppies and the delicate stems of narcissus. The sun hung high above, its light filtering through the leaves of distant olive groves, and the world seemed to exist in a perpetual state of spring, untouched by the harsh realities that govern the lives of mortals far below. She had wandered far from her companions, those nymphs who served as both friends and guardians, their laughter now a distant echo carried away by the wind. Her mother, Demeter, goddess of the harvest and all growing things, had warned her countless times about straying too far from the safety of their company. But Persephone was young, and youth carries with it a certain invincibility, a belief that nothing truly terrible could befall one so loved by the gods, so cherished by a mother whose power made the earth itself bloom. The flower caught her eye as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. It stood apart from all the others, a bloom of such extraordinary beauty that it seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Its petals were the color of twilight, that liminal moment when day surrenders to night, shifting between purple and deep blue with undertones of silver that caught the fading sunlight. The stem rose from the earth with an unusual thickness, and the leaves that surrounded it were broad and lush, darker than any she had seen before. Persephone approached the flower with the curiosity that had always defined her nature. She had inherited her mother's love of all things that grew from the earth, but where Demeter's relationship with plants was one of cultivation and control, Persephone's was one of wonder and discovery. Each flower was a mystery to be explored, each bloom a secret to be learned. This particular specimen called to her with an intensity she had never experienced, as though it had been planted specifically for her to find, as though it had been waiting through countless seasons for this very moment. She knelt in the grass, her white robes pooling around her like foam upon the shore. The earth beneath her knees was warm, almost unnaturally so, and she could feel a strange vibration running through the ground, a pulse that matched the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Her hand reached out, fingers extending toward the extraordinary bloom, and for just a moment she hesitated. Something in the air had changed. The birdsong that had accompanied her throughout the day had ceased. The wind had died completely, leaving the meadow in an eerie stillness that pressed against her skin like a physical presence. But the flower was too beautiful to resist. Her fingers closed around the stem, and she pulled. The earth exploded beneath her. The ground split open with a sound like thunder, a great chasm tearing itself into existence with such violence that the very air seemed to scream. Persephone stumbled backward, but the earth was already crumbling beneath her feet, great chunks of soil and stone tumbling into the abyss that had opened where the flower had stood. She tried to run, but the meadow was falling away in all directions, the solid ground becoming as insubstantial as water, and she was falling into darkness so complete that it swallowed even her own screams. From the depths of that impossible chasm, something rose to meet her. Black horses, their coats gleaming like polished obsidian, their eyes burning with an inner fire that spoke of realms beyond mortal comprehension. They pulled behind them a chariot of equal darkness, its wheels crackling with an energy that seemed to consume light itself. And standing within that chariot, reins held in hands that had never known the warmth of the sun, was a figure that radiated power and authority in equal measure. Hades, lord of the underworld, king of the dead, had come for her. His face was both terrible and beautiful, carved from the same darkness that surrounded them. With features that might have been handsome had they not been so utterly cold, so completely devoid of the warmth that characterized the gods above. His eyes met hers as she fell, and in that gaze she saw depths that mortals were never meant to witness, centuries of solitude and duty, an eternity of ruling over the dead while his brothers divided the bright world above between them. He caught her with an ease that spoke of strength beyond measure, one arm encircling her waist and pulling her into the chariot beside him. She fought, of course. She was her mother's daughter, filled with the vitality of spring and growth, and every instinct screamed at her to escape this creature of death and darkness. Her fist struck against his chest, which might as well have been stone for all the effect her blows had. She called out for her mother, her voice raw with terror, but the chasm was already closing above them, the meadow sealing itself as though it had never been torn asunder. The descent into the underworld was unlike anything that could be described in the language of the living. Light did not simply fade, but was actively consumed by the darkness through which they plunged. Temperature became meaningless, for the cold here was not the cold of winter or night, but something far more profound, the absolute absence of warmth that exists only in places where life has no dominion. Sound became muted as though they travelled through water, and Persephone's continued struggles seemed to occur in a bubble of silence, her cries echoing strangely in her own ears. Hades said nothing throughout this descent. His attention remained fixed on the path before them, if path it could be called, guiding his horses through the darkness with the certainty of one who had travelled this route countless times. His arm remained around Persephone, not cruelly tight, but firm enough that escape was impossible, and she gradually became aware that his grip was the only thing preventing her from being lost entirely in the void through which they travelled. They emerged onto a shore that defied all natural law. The river that stretched before them was not water, but something else entirely, a liquid that moved with consciousness and intent, its surface reflecting nothing yet, somehow containing everything that had ever been or would ever be. This was the Styx, the river of oaths, the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. Its waters moved with currents that followed no earthly logic, sometimes flowing in multiple directions simultaneously, sometimes standing perfectly still despite the obvious presence of wind and weather. The ferryman waited at his post, exactly as he had waited for millennia beyond counting. Charon was ancient beyond reckoning, his form more suggestion than substance, wrapped in robes that might have been grey, or might have been the colour of fog, or might have been the absence of colour entirely. His face was hidden beneath a hood that no light could penetrate, and his hands, which gripped the pole that propelled his ferry, were skeletal things that seemed to be composed more of determination than flesh. He inclined his head to Hades as the god of the dead guided his chariot onto the waiting boat. No words were exchanged, for none were necessary. This was ritual, ancient and unchanging, the crossing that all who entered this realm must make. Persephone, who had finally exhausted herself in her struggles, stood rigidly beside her captor, her mind still reeling from the impossibility of what had occurred. The crossing was both instantaneous and eternal. Time moved differently here, flowing and ebbing like the strange water over which they glided. Persephone became aware of presences in the river, shapes that moved beneath the surface, reaching up toward the ferry with hands that dissolved into nothing before they could grasp the hull. These were the unburied dead, she realized with horror, those who had not received proper funeral rites, and were therefore condemned to wander the shores of the Styx for 100 years before being permitted to cross, their faces pressed against the surface of the water, distorted and terrible, mouths open in silent screams or pleas. She turned away, but there was nowhere to look that did not reveal some new horror. The shores on either side were crowded with shades, the spirits of the dead waiting their turn for passage, their forms translucent and flickering like candle flames in a strong wind. Some seemed aware of the ferry's passage, turning their empty gazes toward it with expressions that ranged from longing to despair. Others stood motionless, lost in whatever dreams or nightmares occupied the minds of those who no longer lived. Hades remained unmoved by the sights that surrounded them. This was his kingdom, his responsibility, and he had long since grown accustomed to the parade of human suffering that was the underworld's currency. He stood in the ferry with perfect balance despite its movement over the water, one hand still resting lightly on Persephone's shoulder, a gesture that was both possessive and protective. When at last they reached the far shore, Persephone stepped onto land that felt somehow more solid than the earth of the world above, as though it were the true ground and everything else merely an imitation. Before them rose gates of such immense size that they seemed to hold back not just the dead, but reality itself. They were wrought from a metal that resembled iron, but was darker, absorbing light in a way that natural substances did not, and they were covered in reliefs that depicted scenes she dared not examine too closely. Guarding these gates was Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, and the sight of him drove the last remaining hope from Persephone's heart. He was enormous beyond belief, each of his 3 heads the size of a bull, with jaws that could swallow a mortal whole and teeth like swords. His fur was black and matted, and his eyes glowed with the same inner fire that burned in the gazes of the horses that had pulled them here. He growled as they approached, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the earth. But at a gesture from Hades, he lowered his massive heads and allowed them to pass. Beyond the gates lay the true underworld, and it was vast beyond comprehension. The sky, if it could be called such, was an impossible expanse of darkness, broken by what might have been stars, or might have been the distant lights of souls making their final journeys. The landscape stretched in all directions, composed of plains and valleys, rivers and mountains, all rendered in shades of grey and black, with occasional hints of colour, so faint they might have been imagined. The palace of Hades rose in the distance, a structure that defied earthly architecture in its scale and grandeur. It was carved from the living rock of the underworld itself, its towers reaching up into the darkness like the fingers of a buried god trying to claw its way to the surface. Windows glowed with a pale light that was neither welcoming nor entirely forbidding, and as they approached, Persephone could see gardens surrounding the palace, strange gardens where plants grew in defiance of the absence of sunlight, their leaves silver and grey, their flowers blooming in shades of white and purple that seemed to generate their own faint luminescence. Hades guided her through corridors of polished black stone, past chambers that opened onto vistas she could not comprehend, rooms that seemed to contain entire landscapes within their walls, galleries hung with what might have been art, or might have been windows into other realms entirely. The palace was silent, save for the soft echoing of their footsteps and the distant sound of running water. For rivers ran through the underworld in profusion, each with its own nature and purpose. They arrived at last in a great hall, its ceiling lost in shadows high above, its floor a mirror-smooth expanse of stone that reflected the strange light of the torches that burned without consuming themselves along the walls. At the far end of the hall stood a throne, and Hades led her to a smaller seat beside it, a chair of carved obsidian that was both beautiful and deeply uncomfortable to look upon. Only when he had seated himself upon his throne did Hades finally speak to her, his voice deep and resonant, carrying an authority that came not from volume, but from the certainty of one who had never been disobeyed. Welcome to the underworld, Persephone, daughter of Demeter. This is now your home. The words fell upon her like blows, each one driving deeper the reality of her situation. She had been stolen from the world of light and life, dragged into this realm of shadows and death, and the god who had taken her spoke as though this was somehow fitting, somehow right. "You have no right," she managed to say, her voice shaking with a combination of fear and fury. "And my mother will come for me. Zeus himself will demand my return." Something that might have been amusement flickered across Hades' stern features. "Your father Zeus gave his permission for your abduction, child. Did you truly think I would dare such an act without the consent of the king of the gods?" The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Her father, whom she barely knew, who existed for her primarily as a distant figure of power and authority, had consented to her capture. He had allowed her to be torn from her mother's arms and brought to this place of death and darkness. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that for a moment she could not even process it. Why? She whispered, "Why would he do such a thing?" Hades leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes fixed upon her with an intensity that made her want to look away but left her unable to do so. "Because I am the eldest of the three brothers, and yet I rule over a kingdom that no one wishes to enter. Because I dwell in solitude while Zeus enjoys the company of goddesses and nymphs beyond counting, while Poseidon has his amphitrite. Because even the gods above feel that I, who have never failed in my duties, who have maintained the order of death and passage for eons, deserve some measure of what my brothers take for granted." There was no self-pity in his words, only a statement of fact delivered with the same certainty with which he had welcomed her to his realm. But beneath that certainty, Persephone detected something else, something she had not expected to find in the god of death. Loneliness. A loneliness so profound and so ancient that it had become part of his very nature, woven into the fabric of his being as thoroughly as the darkness that surrounded them. "And so you steal me from everything I know and love?" she demanded, some of her earlier fire returning. "You take me from my mother, from the sunshine and flowers, from the life I was meant to live because you are lonely?" "I take what Zeus has granted me," Hades replied evenly, "and I offer you a position that no other goddess can claim. You would be queen of the underworld, ruler of the dead, mistress of this vast realm. You would have power beyond measure and authority second only to my own." "I want none of it," Persephone said, her voice breaking. "I want to go home." Hades regarded her in silence for a long moment, and she could not read what passed behind those dark eyes. Finally, he stood, the movement as fluid and controlled as everything else about him. "You will be shown to your chambers," he said. "You will find them comfortable, I trust. In time, you will come to understand that there are things to appreciate even in the darkness, that death is not the end but a transformation, and that this realm, for all its shadows, has its own beauty." "Never," Persephone said. The word a vow. "I will never accept this. I will never stop trying to return to the light." A flicker of something crossed Hades' face, too quick to identify. He raised one hand, and a figure materialized from the shadows, a servant of some kind, though whether living or dead, Persephone could not tell. "Take her to the eastern chambers," Hades commanded. "See that she wants for nothing." As she was led away, Persephone looked back once at the god who had stolen her from her life. He had already returned to his throne, his attention turned to matters she could not fathom, and she felt a surge of bitter satisfaction that he seemed so unaffected by her defiance. Let him think her broken. Let him believe she would simply accept this fate. Her mother would come, or she would find a way to escape, but she would not remain here, would not become the queen of death, would not surrender the light for shadows. The chambers to which she was brought were indeed comfortable, in the way that a gilded cage might be comfortable. They were vast, comprising multiple rooms connected by arched doorways, with walls of polished stone that reflected the strange luminescence that seemed to be the underworld substitute for sunlight. Furniture of dark wood and upholstered in fabrics of deep purple and silver filled the spaces, arranged with an eye toward both beauty and function. Tapestries hung upon the walls, depicting scenes that were either abstract or so alien to her understanding that they might as well have been. The largest chamber contained a bed that could have accommodated half a dozen people, its frame carved from black wood and draped with curtains of a fabric so fine it was nearly transparent. Beside it stood a table bearing a basin and pitcher, both fashioned from a dark metal that was neither bronze nor iron. Large windows opened onto a balcony that overlooked Hades' strange gardens, and it was to these that Persephone immediately went. The view from the balcony was both more and less than she had hoped for. The gardens stretched below her, filled with plants that defied everything she understood about the natural world. Trees grew with leaves of silver and bark that shimmered like moonlight on water. Flowers bloomed in shades she had no names for, colors that existed in the space between visible hues. Paths of white stone wound through the gardens, leading to fountains that burbled with liquid that was not quite water, and pools that reflected skies that were not quite real. But there was no sun. No warmth fell upon her face from above. The sky, such as it was, remained that impenetrable darkness, broken by lights that moved in patterns too regular to be truly celestial. The air, while not unpleasant, lacked the living quality of the world above, the sense of movement and change that came from wind, born of temperature differences and pressure systems. Everything here was static, unchanging, eternal in its darkness. Persephone sank down upon the balcony floor, her back against the stone balustrade, and for the first time since her abduction, she allowed herself to truly weep. The tears came in great, racking sobs that shook her entire body, grief and fear and fury all mingling together into a tide of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her entirely. She wept for her mother, who must by now have discovered her absence and was surely tearing the world apart in her search. She wept for the meadow and its flowers, for the sunshine she might never feel again, for the simple pleasures of her former life that she had taken for granted. She wept until exhaustion claimed her, and she slumped against the stone, her tears still wet upon her cheeks, and fell into a sleep troubled by dreams of darkness and falling, of voices calling her name from impossible distances, of hands reaching for her through walls of shadow that she could never quite penetrate. When she woke, she found that time in the underworld was impossible to track. Without the sun to mark the passing of hours, without the rhythm of day and night to structure existence, moments seemed to stretch and compress according to no pattern she could discern. She might have slept for minutes or for days, and there was no way to know. A meal had been laid out on a table in one of her chambers while she slept, and the sight of it made her realize how hungry she had become. The food was arranged artfully on plates of dark metal, and it looked both familiar and strange. There was fruit, but not like any fruit she had seen before, its flesh too dark, its skin too smooth. There was bread, but it had a grey cast to it that made her hesitate. There was wine in a crystal decanter, and meat that might have been lamb or might have been something else entirely. She approached the table cautiously, her hunger warring with her suspicion. There were rules about the underworld, old stories told to frighten children and warn the unwary. If you ate the food of the dead, you could never fully return to the world of the living. A single seed, a single bite, and you would be bound to this realm forever. Was this Hades' plan, then? To wait until hunger forced her to compromise herself, to trick her into making a choice that would seal her fate? She backed away from the table, her stomach growling but her will firm. She would not make it so easy for him. She would resist as long as she could, and surely her mother would come before starvation became a real threat. Days passed, or what she assumed were days, measured only by her own need for sleep and the appearance of new meals to replace old ones. She explored her chambers thoroughly, searching for some means of escape or communication with the world above. The windows, while open, looked out upon nothing but the gardens and the endless grey expanse of the underworld beyond. The doors were not locked, but when she ventured beyond them, she found herself in corridors that twisted and turned in ways that defied spatial logic, always leading her back to her chambers, regardless of which direction she chose. The servants who tended to her needs were silent wraiths who appeared and disappeared according to no schedule she could discern. They changed her linens, replaced her meals, kept her chambers immaculately clean, but they did not respond to her questions or pleas. Their faces, when she could see them clearly, were blank and expressionless, and she could not tell if they were living beings or some sort of animated shadows given form by Hades' will. She saw nothing of Hades himself during this time, and she found herself oddly disappointed by his absence. She had expected him to press his suit, to attempt to win her over with honeyed words or demonstrations of his power. Instead, he seemed content to leave her alone in her luxurious prison, and the solitude was more difficult to bear than she had anticipated. The hunger grew worse. She tried to ignore it, to focus on other things, but it became an ever-present ache in her belly, a weakness in her limbs, a fog in her thoughts. She found herself staring at the meals that appeared with increasing frequency and growing elaborateness. Fruits arranged in complex patterns, pastries that released tantalizing aromas, dishes that steamed with heat and promised satisfaction. On what might have been the 5th day, or might have been the 10th, she finally encountered Hades again. She had ventured out onto her balcony to breathe the strange air of the underworld and try to clear her head of the fog that hunger had created, and she looked down to find him walking in the gardens below. He moved through his strange plants with the same confidence he brought to everything else, his dark robes trailing behind him like liquid shadow. As she watched, he paused beside one of the silver-leaved trees and reached up to touch its branches, and she saw something remarkable. The tree seemed to respond to his touch, its leaves brightening slightly, its branches shifting to lean into his hand like a cat seeking affection. He spoke, though she was too far away to hear the words, and she realized he was talking to the tree itself. The god of death, the stern and terrible lord of the underworld, was having a conversation with a plant in his garden. The absurdity of it struck her so forcefully that she almost laughed, but the sound died in her throat when he looked up and his eyes met hers. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other across the distance. Then Hades raised one hand in a gesture that might have been an invitation or a command, and Persephone found herself moving without conscious decision, leaving her balcony and making her way down through the palace to the gardens below. She found him waiting beside a fountain, its waters flowing in defiance of gravity, sometimes rising in spirals, sometimes falling in sheets, sometimes hanging suspended in the air, in droplets that reflected the pale light like diamonds. He watched her approach with an expression that gave nothing away, though she thought she detected something like concern in the set of his shoulders. "You are not eating," he said without preamble. "I will not bind myself to this place," Persephone replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the weakness in her limbs. "You think that I would trick you so crudely?" There was something that might have been disappointment in his tone. "That I would win you through deception rather than honest courtship?" "Courtship?" The word came out sharper than she had intended. "Is that what you call abduction? Theft? Imprisonment?" "I call it what Zeus himself called it when he granted me permission to take you as my wife," Hades said. his voice still maddeningly calm. A marriage arrangement, no different from countless others that have been made among gods and mortals alike since the beginning of time. Different in that I had no say in it, Persephone countered. Different in that you dragged me from my home against my will. Different in that you hold me here as a prisoner, no matter how luxurious my accommodations. Are you a prisoner? Hades gestured to the gardens around them, to the palace rising behind them, to the vast expanse of the underworld stretching in all directions. I see no chains upon your wrists, no guards stand at your door. You are free to go wherever you wish within my realm. But not free to leave it? No, he acknowledged.
Not free to leave it?
Not yet. The qualification caught her attention despite herself. Not yet? What does that mean? Hades was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was choosing his words with great care. I am not the monster you believe me to be, Persephone.
I am stern, yes, unyielding in my duties.
But I am not cruel, and I am not without understanding. I know that you did not choose this fate, that you were given no opportunity to accept or refuse it.
I know that your heart is still in the world above.
With your mother and the flowers and the life you had planned for yourself. Then let me go, she said,
hating the pleading note that crept into her voice. I cannot, he replied simply.
Not without Zeus's permission, which he will not grant. My brother does not make his decisions lightly, and he will not be swayed by tears or anger. He has given you to me, and unless some cosmic balance is disturbed, unless some rule of the universe is violated, you will remain mine. I am not property to be given, Persephone said, her voice rising. I am not a gift to be passed from father to husband like a piece of jewelry or a tract of land. I am a goddess in my own right, daughter of Demeter, and I deserve to have my own will respected. To her surprise, Hades did not dispute this. Instead, he nodded slowly, as though acknowledging a point she had made in a debate. You are correct, he said. You are not property. You are a goddess, powerful in your own right, with dominion over aspects of the natural world that even I do not fully comprehend. And it is precisely because of this that I sought you as my queen. Sought me? Persephone laughed bitterly.
You stole me.
I took what measures were necessary to bring you here, Hades corrected. Would you have come willingly had I simply appeared and asked? No, she admitted.
I would not have.
But that does not give you the right to take me against my will. Perhaps not, Hades said, and there was something in his voice that she could not quite identify. Some emotion that seemed almost vulnerable beneath his usual stern authority. But I have taken you nonetheless, and we must both make the best of the situation in which we find ourselves. I am offering you a position of immense power and responsibility. I am offering you the chance to be not just a goddess of flowers and springtime, but a queen of the dead, a ruler of mysteries and transformations that few gods can claim to understand. I don't want power, Persephone said.
I want my freedom. I want my mother.
I want the sun on my face and the earth beneath my feet that actually grows things instead of just existing in eternal stasis. The underworld is not static, Hades said, and there was a note of offense in his voice, the first real emotion she had heard from him. It is constantly in motion, constantly processing the souls of the dead, guiding them to their proper places, maintaining the balance between life and death that allows your mother's harvests to exist at all. Without me, without this realm, death would have no meaning, and without death, life itself would lose its value. You're saying I should be grateful to be here, Persephone said flatly. I'm saying that you might, if you gave it a chance, find more here than you expect. Hades gestured to the gardens around them. These plants, for instance, they grow without sunlight because they have adapted to the energies of the underworld itself. They are no less alive than the flowers in your meadow, merely different. and they possess properties and uses that your mother's plants do not. Despite herself, Persephone was curious. She had inherited Demeter's love of growing things, and the sight of plants that could thrive in such impossible conditions intrigued her, despite her determination to remain unmoved by anything in this place. "What properties?" she asked, hating herself for the question, even as it left her lips. Hades moved to a nearby bush, its branches hung with small white flowers that seemed to glow with their own inner light. He plucked one of these flowers carefully and held it out to her. "These are asphodel blossoms," he said. "They grow throughout the underworld, but these particular specimens are cultivated in my gardens. In the world above, they would be simple white flowers with limited value. Here, they possess the ability to ease the pain of souls in torment, to provide comfort to those who suffer from the memories of their mortal lives. They are one of the tools I use to maintain order and justice in this realm." Persephone took the flower hesitantly, half expecting it to burn her fingers or curse her somehow. But it felt like any other flower, its petals soft and cool, its stem firm beneath her touch. And as she held it, she became aware of something else, a faint pulse of energy that seemed to flow from the bloom into her hand, up her arm, settling somewhere in the center of her chest. It was soothing, this energy, like a cool drink on a hot day or the embrace of a loved one after a long absence. "It's beautiful," she said, despite herself. "There is much beauty here," Hades said quietly, "if you would only look for it. This realm is not what most believe it to be. It is not simply a place of punishment and despair. It is complex, nuanced, a reflection of the lives that were lived above and the lessons that must be learned below. The Elysian fields, where the heroic and virtuous reside, are as beautiful as anything in your mother's domain. The asphodel meadows, where the ordinary dead make their eternal home, are peaceful and serene. Even Tartarus, where the worst of the damned suffer their punishments, serves a purpose in maintaining the moral order of the universe." "You truly believe that?" Persephone said, studying his face. "You truly see value in all of this death and darkness?" "I do not simply see value in it," Hades replied.
"I am its guardian and its keeper."
"I have spent eons tending to this realm, learning its secrets, understanding its necessities. And I have done so alone, without companion or confidant, because no one else can bear to spend more than the briefest time in the presence of death.
I am the most lonely of all the gods, Persephone.
And I am offering you the chance to share that burden with me." The honesty of the statement, delivered without self-pity or manipulation, affected her more than all his previous arguments. She looked at this god, this stern and terrible figure, and for the first time saw past the power and authority to the being beneath. He was lonely, profoundly, achingly lonely in a way that even immortals should not have to endure. But that did not excuse what he had done. "I understand your loneliness," she said carefully, "but the solution is not to imprison someone else to share it. You should have sought companionship honestly, not through theft and coercion." "Perhaps you are right," Hades acknowledged. "But the deed is done, and we must move forward from where we are, not from where we wish we were. So I will make you an offer, Persephone, daughter of Demeter.
Spend time in my realm.
Learn its ways. Come to understand what it means to rule over the dead. And if, after a full cycle of the seasons has passed, you still wish to return to the world above, I will petition Zeus for your release." "A full cycle?" Persephone's heart sank.
An entire year?
"It is a small fraction of the eternity we gods possess," Hades said. "1 year to determine the course of countless years to come. Surely that is not unreasonable." It was, of course, entirely unreasonable, but Persephone could see that she had little choice in the matter. She was trapped here regardless of her wishes, and at least this way she had some prospect of eventual freedom. But there was still the matter of the food, of the hunger that gnawed at her constantly. "And what of your trick with the food?" she demanded. How can I agree to stay if you mean to bind me here permanently through starvation or deception? Hades looked genuinely insulted. There is no trick. The food in your chambers is food, nothing more. It will nourish you without binding you to this realm any more than you already are by your physical presence here.
I am many things, Persephone, but I am not a cheat.
When I seek to bind you to the underworld, it will be through honest means, and you will know exactly what you are agreeing to. How can I trust you? You cannot, he admitted. Not yet. Trust must be earned, and I have given you no reason to trust me thus far. But I can give you my word, sworn on the Styx itself, that the food in your chambers will not bind you to this realm. And you know as well as I that even gods cannot break oaths sworn on that river. It was true. Oaths sworn on the Styx were inviolable, even for the most powerful of deities. Zeus himself had been bound by such oaths in the past, and no god could remember a time when such a vow had been broken without terrible consequences. Swear it then, Persephone said. Swear on the Styx that the food you provide will not bind me to the underworld. Hades raised his right hand, and his voice took on a resonance that seemed to come from the very stones beneath their feet. I, Hades, lord of the underworld, king of the dead, swear upon the river Styx that the food provided in Persephone's chambers shall not bind her to this realm beyond what is already ordained. This I swear, and may the consequences of breaking this oath fall upon me should I prove false. Thunder rolled through the underworld at his words, and Persephone felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. The oath was sealed, and she knew with absolute certainty that he had spoken truth. Whatever games he might play, whatever manipulations he might attempt, the food at least was safe. Very well, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I will stay for 1 year. I will learn about your realm. But I make no promises beyond that, and I will not pretend to affection or loyalty I do not feel. I ask for nothing more than your honest presence, Hades replied. Come, let me show you more of what you have agreed to learn about. He extended his hand to her, not commanding, but inviting, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His skin was cool to the touch, not cold exactly, but lacking the warmth that characterized the living. Yet his grip was steady and strangely reassuring, and when he began to walk deeper into the gardens, she found herself following without resistance. The gardens were far more extensive than she had realized from her balcony. They wound through the palace grounds in an intricate pattern that seemed to follow some logic she could not quite grasp. Paths diverged and rejoined, sometimes crossing over or under each other via bridges and tunnels carved from the living rock. Streams of that strange, not-quite water flowed between the plantings, and fish that glowed with bioluminescent patterns swam in pools whose depths seemed to contain entire universes. Hades walked in silence for a time, allowing her to take in the sights at her own pace. She found herself drawn to the plants despite her earlier resistance. Each was unique, adapted to this lightless realm in ways that defied everything she had learned from her mother. Some had leaves that generated their own illumination. Others had flowers that opened and closed according to rhythms that had nothing to do with the passage of day and night. Still others seemed to move of their own accord, their branches reaching out as she passed, their roots visibly shifting beneath the surface of the soil. How do they survive? She asked finally, unable to contain her curiosity. Plants need sunlight to live. It's fundamental to their nature. Plants need energy, Hades corrected gently. Sunlight is merely the most common source of that energy in the world above. Here they have learned to draw sustenance from other sources, the ambient magical energy of the underworld itself, the emanations from the rivers, the power that flows through the souls of the dead as they make their way to their final destinations. Life finds a way, even in the realm of death. Did you create them? Persephone asked, running her fingers along the silver leaves of a tree they were passing. Or did they evolve naturally? Both, in a sense, Hades replied. The underworld has existed since the beginning of time, since the first living thing died and required a place to go. Some of these plants have been here just as long, adapting gradually to the conditions they found. Others I have cultivated from specimens brought from above, encouraging them to change, to transform, to become something new. And still others I have created entirely, shaping them from the raw substance of this realm to serve specific purposes. He led her to a section of the garden where the plants grew in distinct groupings, separated by low walls of dark stone. Each grouping seemed to have its own character, its own aesthetic, and as they moved from one to the next, Persephone began to see patterns in the chaos. This section contains plants used for healing, Hades explained, gesturing to a collection of silvery herbs and purple flowers. Not healing of the body, for the dead have no physical ailments, but healing of the spirit. Many souls arrive here carrying wounds from their mortal lives, traumas and griefs that death alone does not cure. These plants help ease that suffering, allowing them to move on to whatever destiny awaits them. And this? Persephone asked, pointing to another section where the plants grew in wild profusion, their flowers a riot of colors more vibrant than anything else she had seen in the underworld. Memory flowers, Hades said, and there was something almost wistful in his voice. When souls drink an infusion of these blooms, they remember their mortal lives with perfect clarity, every moment from birth to death available to them as though it were happening anew. Most souls eventually choose to drink from the lethe instead, to forget and find peace in oblivion. But some prefer to retain their memories, to carry the full weight of their existence into eternity. For them, these flowers are invaluable. They moved through section after section, each revealing some new aspect of the strange horticulture of the underworld. There were plants that could alter perception, allowing souls to experience time differently or to visit realms of dream and imagination. There were plants that could strengthen or weaken the connection between body and spirit, useful for souls that had difficulty fully accepting their state of death. There were even plants that could, under the right circumstances, restore a measure of physical sensation to those who had long since left their bodies behind. Persephone found herself fascinated despite her determination to remain unmoved. The complexity of what Hades had created here, the thoughtfulness with which he had designed these gardens, spoke to a depth of care and understanding that she had not expected from the stern god of death. He was not simply warehousing the dead or punishing the wicked. He was providing them with tools for healing, growth, and transformation, even in death. "Why do you do all this?" she asked, as they paused beside a fountain where souls sometimes came to drink, their translucent forms barely visible in the strange light. "Why go to such lengths for those who are already dead?" Hades was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fountain's waters. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of centuries of thought and consideration. "Because death is not an ending, Persephone. It is a transition, a threshold, a doorway into something else. The quality of that transition, the care with which it is managed, determines the shape of what comes after. I could simply process souls mechanically, sending them to their designated locations without concern for their well-being or understanding. Many expect me to do exactly that, to be nothing more than a stern judge and indifferent warden. But I have learned, over countless ages, that every soul is unique, that each carries within it the story of a life lived, and that story deserves to be honored even in death. "You care about them," Persephone said, surprised by the realization.
"About the dead?"
"Truly care. They are my responsibility," Hades said simply, "and I take my responsibilities seriously. These souls trusted me, whether they knew it or not, to guide them through the greatest transition they will ever face."
How could I not care about them?
It was perhaps the most human thing she had heard him say, and it shifted something in her perception of him. He was not simply a kidnapper or a lonely god seeking companionship. He was a being who had dedicated himself to a thankless task with a thoroughness and compassion that few would ever witness or acknowledge. "Will you show me more?" she asked, and was surprised to find that she genuinely wanted to see more, to understand more about this strange realm she had been brought to. Something that might have been a smile flickered across Hades' stern features. "I will show you everything," he promised, "if you are willing to see it." They walked for what might have been hours, moving from the gardens into other parts of the vast palace complex. Hades showed her the Hall of Judgment, where the souls of the dead came to be evaluated by the 3 judges who served under his authority. She watched from a gallery as mortals stood before those stern figures and had the worth of their lives weighed and measured, their destinies determined by deeds both great and small. Some were sent to Elysium, the paradise reserved for heroes and the virtuous, and Persephone could see the joy and relief that flooded their faces as they received their reward. Others were directed to the asphodel meadows, the neutral ground where ordinary souls spent their eternity in peaceful but unremarkable existence. And some, those whose crimes had been particularly heinous, were condemned to Tartarus, and their screams as they were led away made her blood run cold. "It seems cruel," she said quietly, as they left the Hall of Judgment, "to punish souls for eternity for mistakes made during finite lives." "Is it cruel to maintain justice?" Hades asked. "These souls were not condemned for simple mistakes, Persephone. They are here because they chose, willfully and repeatedly, to cause suffering to others. Murderers, tyrants, those who betrayed sacred trusts and destroyed innocent lives. Would you have me simply forgive such deeds and allow them to enter paradise alongside those who lived with honor and compassion?" "No," she admitted, "but eternity is a long time for punishment." "It is," Hades agreed. "And that is why even the punishments in Tartarus are not without purpose. They are designed to teach, to transform, to force the soul to confront the consequences of its choices. Some souls, after long enough, do learn and change. They are then allowed to move on to the asphodel meadows, or even, in rare cases, to attempt rebirth in the world above. But the transformation must be genuine, the understanding complete. Anything less would be a mockery of justice." He led her next to the asphodel meadows themselves, and here Persephone found something closer to peace. The meadows stretched endlessly in all directions, filled with those glowing white flowers that grew throughout the underworld. Souls wandered among them, translucent and dreamlike, engaged in quiet conversations or solitary contemplation. There was no suffering here, no great joy perhaps, but a calm acceptance that had its own kind of beauty. "Most souls end up here," Hades explained. "The ordinary dead, those who were neither exceptionally good nor exceptionally evil, they led their lives, made their choices, and now they rest. Some spend eternity here. Others eventually choose to drink from the lethe and enter the cycle of rebirth, their memories wiped clean so they can try again with a fresh start." "And Elysium?" Persephone asked. "Will you show me that as well?" "If you wish," Hades said, "though I warn you it may make you more homesick than ever for the world above." He was right. Elysium was beautiful in a way that made her heart ache with longing. Here, the darkness of the underworld was held at bay by a soft, golden light that emanated from the very air itself. Trees grew in profusion, their leaves green and lush, their branches heavy with fruit that never rotted. Fields of grain swayed in breezes that had no source, and flowers bloomed in riots of color that rivaled anything in her mother's domain. The souls who inhabited this paradise were more substantial than those in the asphodel meadows, their forms nearly solid, their faces animated with intelligence and emotion. They gathered in groups to share stories and songs, engaged in athletic competitions that recalled their mortal lives, created art and music and poetry that would have been celebrated in the world above. This was the reward for lives well lived, for heroism and virtue and sacrifice, and Persephone could see why mortals strove so desperately to earn their place here. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You've created something truly beautiful here." "I maintain it," Hades corrected. "But I did not create it. Elysium has always existed, shaped by the dreams and desires of countless souls who hoped for something better beyond death. I merely ensure that those who earn their place here can enjoy it without interference or corruption." They stood together at the edge of Elysium, watching the blessed dead at their eternal pursuits, and Persephone found herself wondering what it would be like to rule over such a place, to be responsible for maintaining this paradise for all eternity. There would be a certain satisfaction in it, she thought, a purpose that her life in the world above had sometimes lacked. She had been her mother's daughter, helper, and companion, but never truly her own person with her own responsibilities and domain. Here, if she accepted Hades' offer, she would be a queen in her own right. She would have power and authority, responsibilities that were hers alone. It was tempting, more tempting than she wanted to admit, and that temptation frightened her almost as much as the abduction itself had. "I need to rest," she said abruptly, pulling away from the view of Elysium. "This is all too much to absorb at once." "Of course," Hades said, and she thought she detected disappointment in his voice, though his face remained impassive. "I will escort you back to your chambers." The walk back through the palace was conducted in silence. Persephone's mind churned with everything she had seen, trying to reconcile the beauty and complexity of the underworld with her determination to escape it. She had expected to find only darkness and despair, but instead she had discovered a realm of purpose and transformation, carefully maintained by a god who took his duties more seriously than any other deity she had ever encountered. When they reached her chambers, Hades paused in the doorway, his dark eyes studying her face as though trying to read her thoughts. "I know that this is not what you would have chosen," he said quietly, "but I hope that what you have seen today has shown you that it is not the punishment you feared. There is room here for growth, for learning, for becoming more than what you were. You could be happy here, Persephone, if you allowed yourself to be, or I could be free in the world above," she replied. "Happy or not, at least it would be my choice." "Choice is an illusion," Hades said, and there was something almost bitter in his tone. "I did not choose to rule the underworld. When the three brothers divided the cosmos between them, this fell to me not because I wanted it, but because someone had to take it, and I was the eldest. I have made the best of it, found meaning and purpose in a role that no one else wanted. Is that not what we all do, gods and mortals alike? We take the circumstances we are given and make of them what we can." "That's not the same as being dragged from your home and imprisoned," Persephone said. "Is it not?" Hades asked. "I am as much a prisoner of this realm as you are, Persephone. I cannot leave it for more than brief periods, cannot abandon my duties, cannot escape the role that was thrust upon me. The difference between us is that I have had eons to accept my cage. You have had mere days, but acceptance will come if you give it time." He left her then, disappearing into the shadows of the corridor with a swirl of his dark robes, and Persephone was alone once more with her thoughts. She ate that night, taking Hades at his word about the food. The meal was simple but delicious, the fruit sweet and the bread warm, and the act of eating after so many days of self-imposed starvation left her feeling almost dizzy with relief. Her body's needs had been met, but her mind remained troubled, churning through everything she had seen and heard. Sleep came with difficulty, and when it finally claimed her, her dreams were strange and vivid. She walked through meadows that were simultaneously the ones she had known in the world above, and the asphodel meadows of the underworld. Her mother called to her from a great distance, but when she tried to run toward that voice, she found herself moving instead toward Hades' palace. The god himself appeared in her dreams, sometimes stern and terrible, sometimes almost gentle, always enigmatic and impossible to fully understand. She woke to find another day had passed, or what passed for a day in this timeless realm, and she knew that her education in the ways of the underworld was far from complete. Hades had shown her the beautiful parts, the carefully maintained gardens and the paradises and the purpose, but she knew there was more, darker aspects that he had not yet revealed, and some part of her insisted on seeing everything, on understanding the full scope of what she was being asked to accept. She found him in his throne room, seated upon his great chair of dark stone, dealing with matters of state. Souls appeared before him to make requests or lodge complaints, and he heard each one with the same careful attention, dispensing justice and guidance with a fairness that surprised her. He did not dismiss the concerns of the dead as trivial, did not treat them as inferior beings now that they had left life behind. Instead, he gave each soul the respect of his full consideration, and his rulings, while sometimes harsh, were always reasoned and explained. When the last petitioner had departed, he turned his attention to her, raising one eyebrow in silent inquiry. "Show me Tartarus," she said without preamble. "You've shown me the beautiful parts of your realm. Now show me the darkness." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she could not quite identify. "Are you certain? What you will see there is not easy to witness, even for one of divine blood." "I'm certain," she said firmly. "If I am to understand this place, I must see all of it, not just the parts you think will convince me to stay." Hades rose from his throne, and there was something almost approving in his bearing. "Very well, but stay close to me and do not stray from my side. Tartarus is dangerous even for gods, and the entities imprisoned there would not hesitate to harm you if given the opportunity." The journey to Tartarus took them deep beneath the palace, down stairways that seemed to descend forever, through corridors that grew increasingly oppressive and difficult to breathe in. The temperature rose as they went, and the air took on a sulphurous quality that burned in Persephone's lungs. Sounds reached them from below, screams and wails and the grinding of machinery that was designed to inflict pain. The entrance to Tartarus was guarded by creatures that made Cerberus look tame by comparison. They were enormous and misshapen, with too many limbs and eyes in wrong places, and they radiated a malevolence that made Persephone's skin crawl. But they bowed to Hades as he approached, recognizing their master, and allowed them to pass without challenge. Beyond the gates lay a vision of suffering that exceeded anything Persephone could have imagined. The landscape of Tartarus was a twisted mockery of the natural world, with mountains of jagged obsidian and rivers of fire and skies that rained acid and worse. Throughout this hellscape, the damned endured their punishments, each tailored specifically to the crimes they had committed in life. She saw Tantalus condemned to eternal hunger and thirst, standing in a pool of water beneath fruit-laden branches. But whenever he bent to drink, the water receded, and whenever he reached for the fruit, the branches lifted away, forever denying him relief. She saw Sisyphus pushing his boulder up an endless slope, only to have it roll back down just as he reached the summit, condemning him to begin anew. She saw Ixion bound to a flaming wheel that spun without ceasing, and the Danaids forever attempting to fill leaking vessels with water from a well that never emptied. But these famous punishments were not the worst. There were chambers dedicated to torments she had no names for, pits where souls were torn apart and reformed only to be torn apart again, devices of such exquisite cruelty that she had to look away. And overseeing it all were the Furies, terrible beings of vengeance and retribution who took grim satisfaction in their work. "This is necessary?" she asked, her voice shaking. "All of this suffering?" "For some, yes," Hades replied. his own voice heavy with a weight that spoke of centuries of wrestling with this question.
Not for all, perhaps.
The worst of these souls, those who are here because they violated the fundamental laws of gods and mortals alike, require such punishments to balance the cosmic scales. But others, he trailed off, gazing out over the landscape of torment. Others might be served by gentler means, given time and understanding.
It is something I have pondered for ages. Then why not change it?
Persephone demanded. You are the ruler here. If you believe the punishments are too harsh, why not make them more humane? Because I am not the sole arbiter of justice, Hades said. The Furies were old when the world was young, and they answer to laws that even I cannot fully comprehend.
Zeus and the other Olympians have opinions about how the wicked should be treated.
And the souls themselves, the victims of these criminals, cry out for vengeance. To simply release those who have earned their place here would be to deny justice to all those they harmed. It is a balance I must maintain, even when it troubles me to do so. They left Tartarus after that, and Persephone was grateful to return to the relative peace of the upper underworld. The images of suffering would stay with her, she knew, haunting her dreams and troubling her thoughts. But she had insisted on seeing it, on understanding the full scope of what the underworld contained, and she could not now claim ignorance of its darker aspects. Over the following days and weeks, Persephone began to establish a routine in the underworld. She explored more of the vast palace, discovering libraries filled with scrolls and tablets containing the recorded history of every soul that had ever passed through the realm. She spent time in the gardens, learning the properties and uses of the strange plants that grew there. She attended judgment sessions in the Hall of Judgment, observing the 3 judges as they evaluated new arrivals. And she spent time with Hades himself, engaging him in conversations that ranged from philosophy to poetry, from the nature of justice to the varieties of flowers that grew in the world above. She found him surprisingly well-read, knowledgeable about subjects far beyond death and the underworld. He had spent his eons of isolation studying, learning, thinking about the fundamental questions of existence, and he could discuss them with a depth and nuance that even Zeus could not match. She found herself, despite her determination to remain unmoved, growing to respect him. He was nothing like the monster she had imagined during those first terrifying moments of her abduction. He was stern, yes, and sometimes cold, but he was also fair, thoughtful, and dedicated to his duties in a way that was almost admirable. He ruled the underworld not with cruelty, but with a careful consideration for the well-being of souls under his care. But respect was not affection, and understanding was not acceptance. She still thought of her mother daily, wondering how Demeter was coping with her loss, whether she was searching for her daughter or had given her up for lost. She still longed for the sunlight and the flowers, for the simple pleasures of her former life. And she still counted the days until the year Hades had promised would be complete, and she could petition Zeus for her release. One day, as she walked through the gardens alone, she encountered one of the souls of the dead. He was an old man, translucent and glowing with the soft light that characterized the residents of the asphodel meadows, and he was tending to some of the asphodel flowers with a care that spoke of genuine love for the task. "You're one of the dead," she said, approaching him cautiously. She had seen souls from a distance, but had not yet spoken directly to one. "I am," the old man confirmed, looking up at her with eyes that held both wisdom and sadness. "And you are the goddess that Lord Hades has brought to be his queen. We have all heard of your arrival." "I'm not his queen," Persephone said quickly.
"I'm merely on visiting," the old man smiled gently.
"If you say so, my lady. But if I may be so bold, you have the look of one who belongs here. You tend to these flowers with the same care that Lord Hades himself shows them." "I know flowers," Persephone admitted. "My mother is Demeter. Growing things have always been part of my nature." "Then perhaps you were meant to be here after all," the old man said. Lord Hades has always cared for his gardens, but he does so from duty and understanding. You care for them from love. The plants can sense the difference. They respond to you in ways they do not respond even to him. Persephone looked down at the asphodel flowers she had been absently touching, and realized with surprise that they were blooming more vigorously where her fingers had touched them, their petals brighter, their stems stronger. "How long have you been here?" she asked the old man, deflecting attention from the flowers. "Long enough that I barely remember my mortal life," he replied. "I was a gardener in the world above, tending to the estate of a wealthy man. I was neither heroic enough for Elysium nor wicked enough for Tartarus, so I came here to the meadows, and here I have remained, finding peace in continuing the work I loved in life." "Are you happy?" Persephone asked. The old man considered the question carefully.
Happy is perhaps too strong a word.
"Content might be better. I have no great joys, but neither do I have great sorrows. I tend my flowers, I converse with my fellow dead, and I exist in a state of gentle equilibrium. For one such as I, who never sought greatness or adventure, it is enough." "And Lord Hades?" Persephone asked.
What do the dead think of him?
"He is stern but fair," the old man said immediately. "He does not coddle us or pretend that death is something other than what it is. But neither does he torment us needlessly or abuse the power he holds over us. We respect him even if we do not love him. He is, in every sense, a just ruler." The conversation troubled Persephone more than she wanted to admit. She had been clinging to the belief that the underworld was a place of misery and darkness, that Hades was a tyrant who ruled through fear. But the more she saw, the more she spoke to both Hades and the souls under his care, the more that belief crumbled. This was not the hell she had imagined. It was complex and flawed, yes, but it was also necessary and, in its own way, beautiful. And Hades himself was not the monster she had painted him as in her mind. He was lonely and stern and perhaps too dedicated to duty, but he was also fair and thoughtful and surprisingly kind when kindness was appropriate. She found herself seeking him out more often, engaging him in longer conversations, accepting invitations to tour new sections of his realm or to sit with him while he conducted his business. She told herself it was merely curiosity, a desire to learn as much as possible about the place she had been brought to, but some part of her knew it was more than that. She was beginning to see him not as her captor, but as
something else.
Something she was not quite ready to name. The turning point came during one of their walks through the palace gardens. They had been discussing the nature of memory and the role it played in the formation of identity, debating whether souls who drank from the Lethe and forgot their mortal lives were truly the same beings or if they became something new entirely. "I believe that we are more than our memories," Persephone argued, "that there is some essential core to our being that persists even when specific experiences are forgotten. Otherwise, how could souls learn and grow even in death?" "But our memories shape our choices," Hades countered. "They inform our understanding of right and wrong, guide our reactions to new situations. Without them, how can we be said to be the same person?" "Because love persists even when memory fades," Persephone said, thinking of her mother. "I could drink from the Lethe and forget every moment I have spent with Demeter, but I believe some part of me would still recognize her, still feel that connection." Hades was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Do you truly believe that? That connection can transcend even the loss of memory?"
"I do," she said firmly. "Then perhaps there is hope for us yet," he said quietly. "What do you mean?"
He turned away, looking out over his gardens, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard from him before. "I did not steal you simply because Zeus gave me permission, Persephone. I did not take you merely to ease my loneliness or to have a queen by my side. I took you because in all my eons of existence, In all my ages of ruling over the dead and watching countless souls pass through my realm,
I have never encountered anyone who seemed so right, so perfectly suited to stand beside me to share this burden.
to understand what it means to be responsible for transformation and transition. You don't know me, Persephone protested. You saw me once in a meadow picking flowers.
How could you possibly know that I was right for you?
I have watched you for longer than you know, Hades admitted. Not in person, but through the waters of the Styx, which show me all things. I have seen your kindness to mortal petitioners, the way you help your mother with her work, the joy you take in every living thing. I have seen your strength when faced with injustice, your willingness to stand up for what you believe is right, even when it would be easier to remain silent. And I have seen your capacity for growth, your hunger to learn and understand the world beyond the narrow confines of your mother's domain. You've been spying on me, Persephone said, not sure whether to be flattered or horrified. I have been observing you, Hades corrected, just as I observe all things that might impact my realm. But yes, I will admit that my interest became more personal over time.
I began to watch you, not because I feared you might disrupt the natural order of death,
but because I found in you something I had never expected to find: hope, the possibility that I might not have to face eternity alone. And so you stole me, Persephone said, without asking, without giving me any choice in the matter. Yes, Hades said simply. I did, and I will not pretend that it was the right thing to do or that it was fair to you. But I am a god of the underworld, Persephone, not a god of light and beauty. I do not know how to court someone gently or to win affection through poetry and flowers. I know only how to take what is necessary and to endure the consequences of my actions. And I wanted you here with me, so I took the steps necessary to make that happen. That's not love, Persephone said. That's possession, perhaps, Hades acknowledged. But I am learning slowly that there might be a difference. You have been here for weeks now, and I have watched you move through my realm with curiosity and grace. I have heard you speak to the dead with compassion and seen you tend to the gardens with genuine care. And I have realized that what I feel for you goes beyond simple possession or loneliness. I admire you, Persephone. I respect your strength and your convictions, and I find myself hoping, against all reason, that you might someday come to feel even a fraction of what I feel for you. Persephone found herself at a loss for words. This confession, delivered with such honest vulnerability, struck her in a way that all of Hades' earlier arguments had not. He was not trying to convince her with logic or impress her with the wonders of his realm. He was simply being honest about his feelings, laying himself bare in a way that gods rarely did. I don't know what to say, she admitted finally. You don't have to say anything, Hades replied. I do not expect you to return my feelings, Persephone. I am asking only that you consider the possibility that you might someday be happy here, that you might find purpose and meaning in ruling beside me, that you might see me not as your captor but as a partner. I need time, Persephone said. Time to think, to process all of this. You have time, Hades assured her. All the time you need. I will not press you, will not demand affection or loyalty beyond what you are willing to give. I simply wanted you to know that my feelings are genuine, that this is not merely about easing my loneliness, but about genuinely desiring your companionship specifically. He left her then, disappearing into the shadows of the palace, and Persephone sank down onto a bench in the garden, her mind reeling. Everything had become so much more complicated. It would have been easier if Hades had remained the villain of her story, the cruel captor who held her against her will for his own selfish purposes. But he was not that, or at least not only that. He was complex and flawed and unexpectedly vulnerable, and she found herself drawn to him in ways that frightened her. She thought of her mother, up in the world above, and wondered what Demeter would think of these developments. Her mother had always been protective, sometimes overbearingly so, and she had never approved of any potential suitors for Persephone's hand. Would she understand if Persephone chose to remain in the underworld? Would she accept Hades as a son-in-law? Or would she see it as the ultimate betrayal, her daughter choosing death over life, darkness over light? Days passed, measured only by her own internal clock and the needs of her body for sleep and sustenance. Persephone continued her exploration of the underworld, but now with a different purpose. She was no longer simply learning about the realm so she could understand what she was rejecting. She was beginning to see it as a place where she might actually belong, where her skills and interests might find purpose and meaning. She spent more time in the gardens, using her abilities to encourage the growth of new plants, experimenting with hybrids that combined the vitality of the world above with the strange properties of underworld flora. She created flowers that bloomed with both natural beauty and therapeutic properties, plants that could ease the suffering of tormented souls while also bringing aesthetic pleasure. Hades watched these experiments with interest, offering suggestions based on his long experience but never interfering with her creative process. She also began to take a more active role in the administration of the underworld itself. She attended more judgment sessions, offering her perspective on cases that were particularly complex or ambiguous. The three judges, ancient beings who had served since the beginning of time, initially regarded her with skepticism, but they gradually came to respect her insights. She had a way of seeing beyond the surface of a soul's actions to the motivations and circumstances that had shaped them, and her suggestions often led to more nuanced and ultimately more just outcomes. She visited the different regions of the underworld, speaking with souls and learning their stories. She walked through the asphodel meadows and conversed with the ordinary dead, hearing about their mortal lives and their experiences in the afterlife. She ventured into Elysium and met heroes whose names were legends in the world above, finding them sometimes disappointingly ordinary beneath their glorious reputations. She even returned to Tartarus, though she could not bear to stay long, and spoke with some of the less violent prisoners about their crimes and their punishments. Through all of this, she found herself spending more and more time with Hades. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the philosophical and abstract to the personal and emotional. He told her about his childhood before the division of the cosmos, when he and his brothers had fought together against the Titans. He described the moment when lots were drawn and he realized that he would rule the underworld, the mix of disappointment and determination that had filled him. "I could have refused," he admitted during one of these conversations. "I could have demanded a redrawing of lots or insisted on a different arrangement. But someone had to take responsibility for the dead, and I knew that neither Zeus nor Poseidon had the temperament for it.
Zeus is too impulsive, too hungry for glory and excitement.
Poseidon is too mercurial, too prone to rages and passions.
But
I have always been the steady one, the reliable one, the one who could be counted on to do what was necessary regardless of personal preference." "Do you ever regret it?" Persephone asked, "taking on this burden?" "Every day," Hades said with startling honesty.
"And never. I regret the isolation, the loneliness, the way that even my own family avoids me unless they need something from me. I regret that I am the god that mortals fear rather than the god they celebrate."
"But I do not regret the work itself. The dead need someone to care for them, to ensure that their transitions are handled with justice and compassion. If I had refused this duty, who would have taken it? And would they have done it with the same dedication?" "You're a better god than you give yourself credit for," Persephone said softly. "Perhaps," Hades said, and something in his voice suggested that her opinion mattered to him more than she realized. "Or perhaps I am simply the best available option in an impossible situation. But I do my duty and I do it well, and that will have to be enough." Persephone found herself revealing things to him as well, things she had never told anyone else. She spoke about the frustration of being Demeter's daughter, always in her mother's shadow, always defined by her relationship to someone else rather than her own qualities. She described the pressure of being a goddess of spring and fertility, expected to be eternally cheerful and nurturing when sometimes she wanted to be serious or contemplative. She admitted that she had sometimes felt stifled by her mother's protectiveness, smothered by a love that was genuine but which left little room for independence or growth. "I love my mother," she said one evening as they sat beside one of the palace's many fountains. "I do, but sometimes I felt like I was more her possession than her daughter. She made every decision for me, controlled every aspect of my life, always with the justification that she was protecting me. And I accepted it because I didn't know there was any alternative, because I thought that was simply what it meant to be her daughter." "And now?" Hades asked. "Now I've been stolen away from her, taken to a place she cannot easily reach, forced to make my own decisions and form my own opinions about things she would never have exposed me to.
And I find that—" She paused, struggling to articulate feelings that were still crystallizing in her mind.
"I find that I'm discovering who I am separate from her, what I think, what I want, what I'm capable of. And it's terrifying but also exhilarating. So in a way, my abduction of you has been liberating," Hades said, and there was something almost amused in his tone. "Don't flatter yourself," Persephone said, but there was no real heat in the words.
"You still stole me against my will."
"The fact that I've found some benefits in the situation doesn't excuse your actions." "I'm not asking for excuses," Hades said. "Merely acknowledgement that the situation is more complex than it first appeared. Everything about you is more complex than it first appears," Persephone muttered. They fell into silence, watching the fountain's waters dance in patterns that defied physics. After a while, Hades spoke again, his voice quieter than before. "If you truly wish to leave when the year is complete, I will not stop you. I promised you that choice, and I will honor it. But I hope, Persephone, that you will at least consider staying, not because I demand it or because Zeus has ordained it, but because you have found something here worth preserving. Purpose, perhaps, or independence, or—" he trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. "Or," Persephone prompted, "or companionship," Hades finished. "With someone who sees you as you are, not as who he wishes you to be." The words hung in the air between them, charged with implications that Persephone was not yet ready to fully examine. She stood abruptly, suddenly needing distance and space to think. "I should rest," she said. "It's been a long day." "Of course," Hades said, rising as well. "Sleep well, Persephone." As she made her way back to her chambers, Persephone found herself acknowledging a truth she had been avoiding for some time. She was falling for him, for Hades, the god of death, the stern ruler of the underworld, the one who had stolen her from her home and her mother. It was absurd and inappropriate and completely unexpected, but it was happening nonetheless. She liked his intelligence, the way he could discuss any topic with depth and nuance. She admired his dedication to his duties, the care he took with every soul under his protection. She appreciated his honesty, even when it would have been easier to lie or dissemble. And beneath his stern exterior, she had discovered a capacity for gentleness and vulnerability that made him far more appealing than she had ever expected. But acknowledging her feelings and acting on them were two different things. There was still her mother to consider, still the fact that she had been brought here against her will, still the question of whether she could truly be happy in a realm of darkness and death. And there was the matter of time. The year Hades had promised was drawing to a close, and soon she would have to make a decision that would shape the rest of her immortal existence. She needed guidance, wisdom from someone who understood both her situation and the complexities of divine politics. But there was no one to ask. The souls of the dead could not help her with questions about the living. Hades himself was too personally involved to be objective, and her mother was far away in the world above, probably frantic with worry and grief, or was she? Persephone had been so focused on her own situation that she had not considered what her absence must be doing to Demeter. Her mother's power was tied to the fertility of the earth, to the cycles of growth and harvest. What happened to those cycles when Demeter was consumed with grief? What happened to the world above when the goddess of the harvest forgot her duties? She found Hades the next day in his study, a vast room lined with shelves containing scrolls and tablets from throughout history. He was reviewing reports from various regions of the underworld, and he looked up when she entered with an expression of pleased surprise. Persephone,
I wasn't expecting to see you today.
is something wrong?
I need to see what's happening in the world above, she said, without preamble.
You said you can observe things through the waters of the Styx. Can you show me my mother?
Can you show me what my absence has done to her?
Hades set down his tablet, his expression growing serious. Are you certain you want to see?
It may not be easy to witness. I'm certain, Persephone said firmly.
I need to know. He rose and led her from the study, down through the palace to a chamber she had never entered before. It was circular, with walls of black stone that seemed to absorb light, and in the center was a pool filled with water drawn from the Styx itself. The surface of the water was perfectly still, reflecting nothing, and Persephone could feel power radiating from it like heat from a fire. Hades stood beside the pool and raised his hands, speaking words in a language that was older than the gods themselves. The water began to ripple and images formed in its surface, hazy at first, but gradually clarifying into scenes from the world above. What Persephone saw made her heart break. Demeter wandered across a landscape that had been transformed into wasteland. Where once there had been fields of golden grain, now there was only barren earth. Trees stood skeletal and lifeless, their branches bare of leaves. Rivers had dried to mere trickles, and the few animals that remained were thin and desperate. The goddess herself looked haggard, her face gaunt with grief, her robes torn and stained. She called out Persephone's name constantly, her voice raw with desperation.
And she tore at the earth with her hands, as though she could dig deeply enough to find her lost daughter. Mother, Persephone whispered.
Tears streaming down her face. The scene shifted, showing mortals suffering the consequences of Demeter's grief. Crops failed throughout the world. Livestock died for lack of fodder. Children went hungry, their bellies distended, their eyes dull with approaching death. Entire villages were abandoned as people migrated in search of food that did not exist.
Famine spread across the earth like a plague, and mortals cried out to the gods for relief that did not come. This is my fault, Persephone said, her voice breaking.
Because I was taken, because my mother grieves for me, the entire world suffers. It is not your fault, Hades said firmly. You did not choose to be taken. This is the consequence of Demeter's inability to accept loss, her refusal to allow the natural cycles of separation and growth that govern all relationships.
Even divine ones. She's my mother, Persephone protested.
Of course she grieves for me.
Any parent would. Grief is natural, Hades agreed.
But this is not grief. This is vengeance. She is punishing the entire mortal world for a slight committed by Zeus and myself. She is using her power not to help, but to harm, and that is not acceptable behavior, even for a goddess. What can I do? Persephone asked helplessly.
I can't go to her.
You said I couldn't leave the underworld. You cannot leave permanently without Zeus's permission, Hades corrected. But you could visit, briefly, to let her know you are alive and well, to ease her grief enough that she might remember her duties. You would allow that? Persephone asked, surprised. I would insist on it, Hades said. As Lord of the Underworld, I have no direct authority over the world above. But I cannot stand by and watch mortals die by the thousands because of a family dispute among gods. It disrupts the natural order, floods my realm with souls who died before their time, and creates chaos that will take years to sort out. If you can convince Demeter to restore the earth's fertility, it benefits everyone. When can I go? Persephone asked eagerly. Now, if you wish, Hades said. Though I must warn you, returning to the world above may make you more reluctant to come back here. Sunlight has a way of making darkness seem intolerable. I'll come back, Persephone said, though she wasn't entirely certain why she was so sure of it. Hades studied her for a long moment, and she thought she saw hope warring with skepticism in his expression. Finally, he nodded. Very well. I will open a passage for you. But Persephone, he hesitated, then continued, do not eat or drink anything while you are in the world above. You have not yet consumed food from the underworld that would bind you here permanently, and I would not have you accidentally bind yourself to the upper realm in the same way. The balance is delicate, I understand, Persephone said. Hades raised his hands and spoke more words of power, and the air before them shimmered and tore, revealing a passage that led upward toward light and life. Persephone could see blue sky through the opening, could feel warmth radiating from the world above, and her heart leapt with longing and anticipation. Go, Hades said softly. Find your mother, ease her pain.
And then?
Return to me, if you will. There is much still unsettled between us. Persephone met his eyes, saw the vulnerability there, the fear that she would not return once she had tasted freedom again. On impulse, she reached out and took his hand, giving it a brief squeeze. I'll be back, she promised. We still have things to resolve, you and I. Then she stepped through the passage and emerged into a world transformed by her absence. The meadow where she had been taken was unrecognizable. The flowers that had bloomed so profusely were gone, replaced by dead stalks and dry earth. The sky above was grey and overcast, and the air had a bitter quality that spoke of approaching winter, though it should have been spring. Persephone stood in the wasteland and felt grief wash over her at what her abduction had cost the world. She called out for her mother, and the cry was answered almost immediately. Demeter appeared as though she had never been far away, materializing from the grey air with a speed that spoke of desperate hope. When she saw Persephone, she let out a cry that was half joy and half anguish, and she ran forward to embrace her daughter with a strength that threatened to crush her. My child, Demeter sobbed, clutching Persephone as though she might disappear if her grip loosened even slightly.
My precious child, I thought you were lost forever.
I have searched everywhere, called upon every god, torn the earth apart looking for you. Where have you been? Who took you? Hades, Persephone said gently, trying to extract herself from her mother's crushing embrace. He took me to the underworld with Zeus's permission.
He wishes me to be his queen. Demeter's expression transformed from joy to fury in an instant. Hades, that dark lord of death has stolen you? And Zeus permitted this? I will make them both pay. I will— Mother, stop! Persephone interrupted.
Look around you. Look at what your grief has done. Demeter glanced at the wasteland surrounding them, and something like shame flickered across her features before being replaced by defiance. What would you have me do? She demanded. Tend to the fields and orchards while my only daughter is imprisoned in the realm of death?
Continue with my duties as though nothing has happened?
I am using the only power I have to force Zeus to return you to me. And in the process, you're killing thousands of mortals who have done nothing to deserve it, Persephone said.
Children are starving, Mother.
Entire families are dying. Is that really the price you're willing to pay?
Any price is worth paying to get you back, Demeter said fiercely. Even my own unhappiness.
Persephone asked, what if I told you that I am learning things in the underworld, that I have found purpose there, and possibly even—
Happiness? That's impossible, Demeter said flatly.
You cannot be happy in that dark, terrible place.
Hades has poisoned your mind, convinced you that death is somehow acceptable when it is the antithesis of everything we stand for. Death is not the antithesis of life, Persephone said,
repeating words she had heard from Hades. It is the completion of it, the natural end of the cycle. And the underworld is not what you think it is. It's complex and strange and sometimes terrible, yes, but it's also beautiful and purposeful and necessary. You defend him, Demeter said, her voice taking on a dangerous quality. You defend the god who stole you from me. I'm trying to explain to you that the situation is more complicated than you believe, Persephone said. I was taken against my will, yes, and that was wrong. But what I've found in the underworld has value. Hades himself has value. He's not the monster you think he is. He has corrupted you, Demeter said, and there was such pain in her voice that Persephone felt tears prick her eyes. My perfect daughter, my beautiful child, and he has turned you against me. I'm not turned against you, Persephone protested.
I love you, Mother. I always will.
But I'm not your possession.
I'm not simply an extension of you. I'm my own person, with my own thoughts and feelings and desires, and you need to accept that. I accept that you are my daughter and that you belong with me, Demeter said stubbornly. I will go to Zeus myself.
I will demand that he order Hades to release you, and if he refuses, I will let every mortal on earth starve until he has no choice but to comply. Mother, please, Persephone begged. You're not hearing me. I'm asking you to restore the earth's fertility, not because Hades or Zeus demands it, but because it's the right thing to do, because mortals don't deserve to suffer for conflicts among gods, because your duty as goddess of the harvest means something. My duty as a mother means more, Demeter said. Nothing matters to me more than you, Persephone. Not the mortals, not the harvests, not even my own honor among the gods. I will burn the world to ash if that's what it takes to bring you home. Persephone stared at her mother, seeing clearly for the first time the depths of Demeter's obsession. This was not healthy love. This was possession, control, an inability to allow Persephone to have any existence separate from her mother's will. And in that moment, standing in the wasteland that her mother's grief had created, Persephone realized something profound. She didn't want to return to this. She didn't want to go back to being Demeter's perfect daughter, forever under her mother's control, never allowed to make her own choices or forge her own path. Whatever she eventually decided about Hades and the underworld, she knew with certainty that she could not simply resume her old life as though nothing had changed. I need to return to the underworld, she said quietly. What? Demeter's voice was sharp with disbelief. No, absolutely not. You will stay here with me where you belong. I gave Hades my word that I would return, Persephone said.
And I need more time to think about what I want, Mother.
Not what you want for me, not what Zeus or Hades want, but what I truly want for myself. You're choosing him over me, Demeter said, and the hurt in her voice was like a physical blow. You're choosing death over life, darkness over light, that cold, terrible god over your own mother. I'm not choosing anyone over you, Persephone said, though she wasn't certain that was entirely true. I'm choosing to make my own decision about my own life.
Please, Mother.
Restore the earth.
Let the harvest grow again.
Give me time to figure out what I want. And then, whatever I decide, we can discuss it like adults, rather than you trying to force me into compliance through manipulation and guilt. If you walk away from me now, Demeter said, her voice taking on a warning tone, I will not be responsible for what happens. The earth will remain barren. The mortals will continue to starve. And it will be your choice that causes it, not mine. No, Persephone said firmly. It will be yours. You are the one with the power to restore the harvests. You are the one choosing vengeance over duty. This is your decision, Mother, and you can't put that responsibility on me. She turned away, looking for the passage back to the underworld, and found it still open, waiting for her return. She could feel Hades' power holding it stable, and she understood what it cost him to leave it open so long, to risk that she might not come back. Persephone, wait, Demeter called, and there was desperation in her voice now.
Please don't go back to him. I'm begging you. Persephone turned back to her mother, and she saw tears streaming down Demeter's face, genuine anguish that made her own heart ache.
But she also saw the stubbornness, the refusal to bend or compromise, the absolute certainty that Demeter knew best, and that Persephone's only role was to obey. "I love you," Persephone said softly, "but I need to do this.
I need to make this choice for myself.
Please try to understand." Then she stepped back through the passage before her resolve could weaken, leaving her mother calling her name in the wasteland above. She emerged in the underworld to find Hades waiting exactly where she had left him, as though he had not moved the entire time she was gone. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. "You came back," he said. And there was wonder in his voice. "I said I would," Persephone replied. "How is your mother?" "Stubborn, grieving, refusing to restore the earth until I'm returned to her." Persephone sighed heavily. "I tried to reason with her, but she won't listen." "Then Zeus will have to intervene," Hades said. "He cannot allow the mortal world to die simply because Demeter is throwing a tantrum." "It's more than a tantrum," Persephone said quietly. "She truly believes she's protecting me, that she's fighting for my well-being. She just can't accept that I might want something different than what she wants for me." "And what do you want?" Hades asked, his voice carefully neutral. Persephone looked at him, this god of death who had stolen her and then surprised her with his complexity, his dedication, his unexpected vulnerability. She thought about the underworld and all she had learned about it, the purpose she had found in tending its gardens and helping guide its souls. She thought about her mother and the suffocating love that had defined her entire existence until now. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I think I need to stay here longer to figure it out." "Will you let me stay past the year you promised? You wish to extend your time here?" Hades asked, surprise evident in his voice. "If you'll allow it," Persephone said. "I'm not ready to make a final decision yet. There's still so much I don't understand about this realm, about you, about myself. I need more time." "You may have all the time you need," Hades said, and there was such relief in his voice that it made her smile. "But Persephone, we must address the situation with your mother. If she will not willingly restore the harvests, Zeus will force her to do so, and the consequences for the mortals cannot wait while you ponder your decision." "What can we do?" Persephone asked. Hades was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through options. When he spoke, his voice was careful, as though he was proposing something that might not be well received. "There is a way to force a compromise. If you were to eat food of the underworld, you would be bound here permanently, but not completely. The rules are complex, but essentially, consuming food from this realm creates a tie that cannot be fully broken. You could potentially spend part of each year here and part in the world above, divided based on how much you consumed." "You're suggesting I bind myself to the underworld?" Persephone asked. "I'm suggesting that if you choose to do so, it would force Zeus and Demeter to accept a compromise," Hades said. "You would be neither fully of the upper world nor fully of the underworld, but something in between. It would satisfy no one completely, but it would resolve the immediate crisis and give you time to continue discovering what you truly want. And if I did this, if I bound myself here, would you—" Persephone trailed off, not sure how to phrase the question. "Would I what?" Hades prompted gently. "Would you expect me to be your wife, your queen, or could I simply be here, learning and growing and figuring things out?" Hades moved closer to her, close enough that she could feel the cool energy that radiated from him, close enough to see the swirl of emotions in his dark eyes. "I would expect nothing from you that you were not willing to freely give," he said quietly. "If you bound yourself to the underworld simply to resolve the crisis with Demeter, I would accept that and ask for nothing more. But Persephone, I want you to know that my offer stands. I want you not just as a resident of my realm or a solution to a political problem.
I want you as my partner, my equal, my queen. And if you can ever bring yourself to want that too, I will be here, waiting. Persephone found herself leaning toward him, drawn by the honesty in his voice and the vulnerability in his expression.
This god, so powerful and ancient, was laying his heart before her, risking rejection with every word. It was the bravest thing she had ever witnessed. "I'm not ready to make that commitment yet," she said softly. "But I'm not ruling it out either. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Hades said, and he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his stern features into something almost beautiful. "Take all the time you need, Persephone. I have waited eons for someone like you."
I can wait a while longer. Then I'll do it, Persephone decided. I'll bind myself to the underworld, partially at least.
Enough to force a compromise, but not so much that I can never return to the surface. And then we'll see what develops from there. "Are you certain?" Hades asked. "Once done, it cannot be undone. You will be tied to this realm for all eternity, even if we eventually decide that we do not suit each other." "I'm certain," Persephone said, and she was surprised to find that she truly was. "This place has become important to me. The work here matters, and whatever happens between us personally, I want to be part of it." Hades reached out and took her hand, his cool fingers intertwining with hers. "And come, let us seal your fate with full knowledge and intention." He led her through the palace to a chamber she had never seen before, a small room with walls covered in ancient carvings that depicted the history of the underworld from its creation to the present day. In the center of the room stood a single tree, unlike any she had seen in the gardens above. Its trunk was black as midnight, and its branches bore fruit that gleamed like rubies in the pale light. "Pomegranates," Persephone breathed. "The fruit of the dead." "The fruit of the underworld," Hades corrected. "Each seed represents a tie to this realm. Eat one, and you are bound here for 1 month of each year. Eat 6, and you spend half your time here and half above. Eat all of them, and you are bound here forever." Persephone approached the tree slowly, studying the fruit that hung from its branches. They were beautiful, these pomegranates, with skin that seemed to glow from within, and a weight that spoke of substance and significance. She reached out and plucked one from the tree, feeling the cool smoothness of its skin against her palm. "How many should I take?" she asked. "That is entirely your decision," Hades said. "I will not advise you one way or another. This must be your choice, made freely and without coercion." Persephone turned the pomegranate over in her hands, considering her options. 6 seeds would split her time evenly between the worlds, but that seemed too much to commit to when she was still uncertain about so many things. 1 or 2 would barely constitute a binding, not enough to satisfy Zeus or pacify Demeter. She thought about the work she had begun in the underworld, the gardens she was cultivating and the souls she was learning to help guide. She thought about the seasons in the world above, how spring and summer and fall each had their own beauty and purpose. And she thought about Hades himself, about the growing connection between them that she was not yet ready to fully acknowledge, but could no longer deny. 4 months, she decided.
1/3 of the year.
Enough to be a real presence in the underworld, to continue the work she had started, to explore whatever might develop between herself and Hades. But not so much that she would be unable to fulfill her duties to the world above or maintain her relationship with her mother, strained though it might become. She split open the pomegranate, its red juice staining her fingers like blood. The seeds inside gleamed like jewels, and she carefully counted out 6 of them, holding them in her palm. 6? Hades asked, surprise evident in his voice.
That would bind you here for half the year. I know, Persephone said.
6 months here, 6 months above. A true division of my time and my loyalties. It feels right, you're certain?
As certain as I can be about anything, Persephone said. She placed the first seed on her tongue, and its flavor exploded across her senses.
It was sweet and tart simultaneously, with undertones of darkness and depth that spoke of the earth from which it had grown. She felt power flow through her as she swallowed, a connection forming between herself and the underworld that was immediate and undeniable. She ate the second seed, then the third. With each one, the connection strengthened, the tie that bound her to this realm becoming more substantial, more permanent. She could feel the underworld's energy flowing into her, changing her in ways both subtle and profound. She was still herself, still Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of spring. But she was becoming something more as well, something new, something that existed in the space between life and death, the fourth seed, the fifth. With each seed consumed, she felt herself transforming, felt new understanding flooding into her mind. She could sense the souls of the dead now, could feel their movements through the underworld as clearly as she had once felt the growth of plants. She could perceive the rivers in new ways, understanding their properties and purposes as though she had always known them. The darkness that had once seemed oppressive now felt comforting, like a blanket drawn close on a cold night. The sixth and final seed passed her lips, and the transformation was complete. She was bound to the underworld now, irrevocably and eternally. 6 months of every year she would spend here, ruling alongside Hades, tending to the dead, and maintaining the delicate balance between life and death. And 6 months she would spend above, helping her mother with the harvests, bringing spring to the world with her presence and taking it away again with her departure. She looked at Hades and saw him watching her with an expression of awe and something that might have been love. The energy that radiated from her now was different. Touched by death and darkness but still fundamentally alive, a bridge between two worlds that had been separate since the beginning of time. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Different," Persephone said, "but also more myself than I've ever been."
I can feel the underworld now, Hades. I can sense its rhythms and its needs.
I understand it in a way I couldn't before. "You are part of it now," Hades said.
As much as I am.
"You are queen of the underworld, Persephone, whether you take the title formally or not. The realm recognizes you as its own." "And the world above?" Persephone asked. "Will it still recognize me?" "You will have to see," Hades said. "But yes, I believe it will. You are still Demeter's daughter, still a goddess of spring and growth. But you are also something new now. The core who was stolen from the meadow is gone. In her place stands Persephone, queen of the underworld, goddess of spring and death both." Thunder rolled through the underworld at his words, and Persephone felt power settle upon her shoulders like a mantle. She was a queen now, truly and completely, with all the authority and responsibility that entailed. And somewhere far above, Zeus and Demeter had surely felt the shift in power, the binding that had been created, and were even now discussing what it meant and how to respond. "What happens now?" Persephone asked. "Now we inform Zeus of what you have done," Hades said, "and we negotiate the terms of the compromise that your action has forced upon all of us. 6 months here, 6 months above. A perfect division that will satisfy no one but which everyone will have to accept." "My mother will be furious," Persephone said. "Your mother will adjust," Hades replied. "She is a goddess, and gods are remarkably adaptable when they must be. She will have you for half the year, which is more than she feared she would ever have again."
"It will be enough. And us?"
Persephone asked, voicing the question that had been hovering between them. "What are we now?" Hades stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the coolness of his presence mixing with the warmth that still emanated from her despite her transformation. He reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his touch gentle despite the power that thrummed through him. "We are whatever you wish us to be," he said softly. Partners in ruling this realm, certainly.
Friends, I hope.
And perhaps if you are willing, and if the feeling grows naturally between us, something more. But there is no rush, Persephone. We have eternity now to discover what we might become together. Persephone found herself leaning into his touch, drawn by the warmth in his voice and the tenderness in his eyes. This god who had stolen her had also, in his strange way, freed her. He had given her purpose and power, had shown her aspects of herself she had never known existed, had treated her not as a possession but as an equal, despite the circumstances of their meeting. "I think," she said slowly, "that I would like to see where this leads."
No promises, no commitments beyond what I've already made, but I'm open to the possibility of more. Hades smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and less burdened than she had ever seen him.
"That is more than I dared hope for," he said. "Thank you, Persephone, for giving us this chance." Before she could respond, the air around them shimmered and crackled with divine energy. Zeus had arrived, and he was not alone. Hermes stood beside him, the messenger god, looking uncomfortable with his role as witness to this family drama. And behind them, barely contained by Zeus's restraining hand, was Demeter, her face twisted with fury and grief. "What have you done?" Demeter demanded, her voice shaking the very foundations of the palace.
What have you done to my daughter, Hades? I can feel the binding. You've corrupted her, poisoned her, turned her into something unnatural. Mother, please, Persephone said, stepping forward.
Hades did nothing.
This was my choice. I ate the pomegranate seeds of my own free will. Lies, Demeter spat.
He tricked you, forced you somehow.
My daughter would never willingly bind herself to the realm of death. Your daughter is standing right here, speaking to you directly, and you refuse to hear her, Persephone said, anger rising in her voice. I made this choice, Mother. Mine. Not Hades, not Zeus's, but mine.
I chose to bind myself to the underworld because I have found purpose here, because I have learned and grown in ways I never could under your suffocating protection.
How dare you? Demeter breathed. After everything I've done for you, every sacrifice I've made, you throw it back in my face like this.
What sacrifices? Persephone demanded. You raised me, yes, and you loved me, but you also controlled every aspect of my existence. You never let me make my own choices or develop my own identity separate from yours. You kept me as your eternal child, never allowing me to grow into my own power. Well, I've grown now, Mother, whether you like it or not. Zeus cleared his throat, and both goddesses turned to face him. The king of the gods looked tired, as though this whole situation had aged him despite his immortality. Enough, he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority.
What's done is done.
Persephone has bound herself to the underworld by consuming 6 seeds of the pomegranate. Under the ancient laws, this means she must spend 6 months of each year in the realm of death. The remaining 6 months she may spend as she wishes. No, Demeter said flatly.
I will not accept this. I will keep the earth barren until she is returned to me fully. Then you will be punished for dereliction of duty, Zeus said, his voice hardening.
I have been patient with your grief, sister, but I will not allow you to hold the mortal world hostage indefinitely. If you refuse to restore the harvests, I will strip you of your position and grant it to another. Perhaps Demeter Minor would appreciate the responsibility you seem so willing to abandon. The threat was clear, and Demeter paled. Her identity, her entire sense of self, was bound up in her role as goddess of the harvest. To lose that would be to lose everything that made her who she was. You would not dare, she whispered. Test me, Zeus replied. See how far I will go to protect the mortals under my care. You are my sister, and I love you, but my duties as king of the gods supersede family loyalty.
Make your choice, Demeter.
Accept the compromise that Persephone has created or lose everything. Silence fell over the group. Demeter stood frozen, clearly warring with herself, while Persephone watched with a mixture of pity and frustration. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice barely audible. 6 months. I will have her for 6 months each year. Yes, Zeus confirmed. From the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, she will return to the world above. During that time, the earth will bloom and flourish as it always has. But from autumn to spring, she will reside in the underworld with her husband. I have not agreed to marry him, Persephone interjected quickly. I've agreed to rule beside him to share the responsibilities of the underworld. But our personal relationship is still undefined. Zeus raised an eyebrow. You have eaten the food of the underworld and bound yourself to its king. In the eyes of divine law, you are married, whether you wish to call it such or not. Divine law can be revised, Persephone said firmly. I will be queen of the underworld, but the nature of my relationship with Hades will be determined by us, not by ancient customs or the assumptions of others. Zeus looked at Hades, who nodded. She speaks truly, the god of the dead said. We will define our relationship in our own terms and in our own time. The title of queen she has earned through her actions and her binding to this realm. Anything beyond that is between us. Very well, Zeus said, though he looked puzzled by this arrangement. In his experience, marriages were matters of alliance and duty, not personal choice or gradual development. The important thing is that the crisis is resolved. Demeter will restore the harvests, Persephone will divide her time between the worlds, and the natural order will be maintained. Is this acceptable to all parties?
No, Demeter said, tears streaming down her face.
It will never be acceptable, but I see that I have no choice. You have all conspired against me, turned my own daughter against me, and now you force me to accept this travesty as though it were justice.
Mother,
Persephone said, moving toward her.
Please try to understand. I'm not turning against you. I'm growing up.
I'm becoming my own person. That doesn't mean I love you any less or that our relationship has to end. It just means it has to change. Demeter looked at her daughter, and for a moment the fury faded, replaced by a grief so profound it made Persephone's heart ache. You were all I had, Demeter whispered. My purpose, my joy, my reason for existing. What am I supposed to do with half a year of emptiness?
You're supposed to remember that you are more than just my mother, Persephone said gently.
You are the goddess of the harvest, protector of agriculture, keeper of the cycles of growth. You have responsibilities and purposes beyond me, and you have your own life to live, relationships to form, experiences to have. You can't center your entire existence around me. That's not healthy for either of us. I don't know how to do that, Demeter admitted, her voice breaking. Then learn, Persephone said. Just as I'm learning how to be my own person, you can learn how to be yourself without me constantly by your side. It will be difficult, I know.
But Mother, we're goddesses.
We have eternity to figure this out. Demeter was silent for a long moment, clearly struggling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Finally, she nodded, a single sharp gesture that conveyed acceptance if not agreement. Very well, she said. I will restore the earth. But know this, daughter mine. Every day you spend in that dark realm is a day of winter in my heart. The world will reflect my grief, will know the coldness of your absence. When you return to me in spring, life will bloom again. But never forget what your choice has cost. With that, Demeter vanished, her departure marked by a surge of power that rippled across the boundaries between worlds. Persephone felt it immediately, the loosening of the death grip that her mother had maintained on the earth's fertility. Seeds would sprout again. Plants would grow, the famine would end, and mortals would once again know the bounty of the harvest goddess, but they would also know her grief. For 6 months of every year, while Persephone dwelt in the underworld, Demeter would allow her sorrow to manifest in the world. Autumn and winter would be born from a mother's heartbreak, the seasons of dying and dormancy, a reflection of loss and longing. It was manipulative, certainly, a constant reminder of the price of Persephone's independence. But it was also, in its way, honest. Demeter was not pretending to be fine with the arrangement. She was allowing her pain to be seen, to be acknowledged, to shape the world just as her joy had always done. Zeus sighed heavily. Well, that could have gone worse. At least the mortals will survive, though I suspect they'll find winters rather more harsh than they've previously experienced. They will adapt, Hades said calmly. Mortals are remarkably resilient, and the cycle of seasons will teach them things they need to know about preparation and storage, about the value of abundance when it comes and the necessity of endurance when it does not. Spoken like a god who has never had to worry about starving, Hermes muttered, then flinched when Hades turned his dark gaze upon him. I am the god who sees every soul that dies of starvation, Hades said quietly. I witness their suffering, hear their final thoughts, guide them to their rest in the afterlife. Do not presume to lecture me on the trials of mortals, messenger. Hermes held up his hands in a gesture of surrender.
Point taken.
I'm just here to observe and report back. Though I must say, little cousin, you've caused quite the stir. The gods are all talking about you and your unprecedented arrangement with Lord Hades here. Let them talk, Persephone said. I'm not interested in the opinions of gods who have never met me and don't understand the situation. Spoken like a true queen, Zeus said, and there was approval in his voice. Very well, the matter is settled. Persephone will return to the world above in spring, and until then she remains in the underworld.
I trust there will be no further complications?
None that cannot be managed, Hades said. Zeus nodded and gestured to Hermes. Come, we have imposed on Lord Hades's hospitality long enough, and I have several other crises demanding my attention. Mount Olympus never runs itself. The two gods departed, leaving Persephone and Hades alone in the chamber with the pomegranate tree. The silence that fell between them was not uncomfortable, but it was weighted with all the implications of what had just occurred. You stood up to Zeus, Hades said finally, and to your mother.
That took courage, or foolishness, Persephone said.
I'm not entirely sure which. Courage, Hades insisted. You claimed your right to define your own existence, to make your own choices about your life and your relationships. That is never foolish, no matter how powerful the opposition. My mother hates me now, Persephone said softly. Your mother is hurt and frightened, Hades corrected, but she does not hate you. That emotion is not in her nature, at least not where you are concerned. She will adjust, given time, and when you return to her in spring, she will welcome you with such joy that all the winter's sorrow will be forgotten, at least temporarily. And what about us? Persephone asked, gesturing between them. What happens now that we're bound together but not quite married, partners but not quite lovers, something undefined and uncertain? Now, Hades said, moving closer, we have 6 months to discover what we might become. No expectations, no pressure, just two gods learning to work together and perhaps, if we're fortunate, to care for each other. Does that sound acceptable? It sounds perfect, Persephone said, and she meant it. The days that followed established a new rhythm in the underworld. Persephone threw herself into her role as queen with enthusiasm that surprised even Hades. She reorganized the gardens, creating new sections for plants with specific purposes. She established regular sessions where she would meet with souls who had questions or concerns about their afterlife experiences. She worked with the 3 judges to refine the criteria by which souls were evaluated, adding nuances and considerations that their ancient perspectives had overlooked. Most significantly, she began to work on reforms in Tartarus. While she understood the necessity of punishment for the truly wicked, she believed that even torment should have a purpose beyond simple retribution. She worked with the Furies to develop rehabilitation programs for certain prisoners, opportunities for them to learn from their mistakes and potentially earn transfer to the asphodel meadows or even In rare cases, rebirth in the world above. The Furies resisted at first, viewing punishment as an end in itself rather than a means to transformation. But Persephone was persistent, and she had the authority of a queen behind her arguments. Slowly, grudgingly, they began to implement her suggestions, and to their surprise, some of the prisoners responded positively to the opportunity for growth and change. Hades watched all of this with a mixture of pride and wonder. Persephone brought to the underworld something it had never had before. Hope, not false hope, not the denial of death's reality, but genuine hope that even in death change was possible, that even the damned might find redemption if they were willing to work for it. It was revolutionary, and it transformed the very nature of the realm. Their personal relationship developed more slowly, but no less significantly. They spent hours together each day, discussing philosophy and policy, debating the merits of different approaches to justice, sharing stories from their vastly different experiences. Hades told her about the war with the Titans, about the early days when the cosmos was young and the gods were still figuring out their roles. Persephone shared memories of her childhood, of the simple joys she had experienced growing up under her mother's care before that care had become suffocating. They discovered shared interests in unexpected places. Both loved music, though Hades preferred the somber melodies of funeral dirges while Persephone enjoyed the bright songs of celebration. They compromised, finding pieces that blended both moods, creating something new and uniquely theirs. Both enjoyed strategic games, and they would spend evenings locked in intense contests of skill and wit, each victory hard-won and deeply satisfying, and gradually, almost imperceptibly, affection grew between them. It started with small gestures, Hades bringing her a particularly interesting soul to speak with, Persephone creating new varieties of asphodel flowers specifically for his chambers. It progressed to casual touches, a hand on a shoulder, fingers brushing as they reached for the same scroll, sitting close enough that their robes touched. One evening, perhaps 3 months after she had eaten the pomegranate seeds, they sat together in the palace gardens watching the strange lights that served as stars in the underworld sky. They had spent the day dealing with a particularly complex judgment, a soul whose deeds had been neither clearly good nor clearly evil, and they were both tired from the mental effort of weighing competing factors and reaching a fair conclusion. "Do you ever regret it?" Hades asked suddenly, eating the pomegranate seeds. "Binding yourself here?" Persephone considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," she admitted.
I miss the sun.
"I miss the feeling of real soil beneath my feet, soil that has never known death."
I miss my mother, even though our relationship is complicated.
"But regret?"
No, I don't regret it.
"What I have here, what I've built and learned and become, is worth the price I paid." "And what have you become?"
Hades asked softly. "Someone complete," Persephone said.
"Before, I was only half-formed, defined entirely by my relationship to my mother and my role in her domain. Now I'm my own person with my own responsibilities and my own identity.
I'm Persephone, queen of the underworld, goddess of spring and death both.
And I like who that person is. I like who that person is as well," Hades said, and there was such warmth in his voice that Persephone felt her heart skip a beat. She turned to face him fully, studying his profile in the strange light. He was handsome, she realized in his own austere way. The sharp angles of his face, the darkness of his eyes, the way he carried himself with absolute certainty, all of it combined to create an appeal that she had been too angry and frightened to see when she first arrived. "Hades," she said, and he turned to meet her gaze.
I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful simultaneously.
Hades stared at her, and she saw emotions flicker across his face too quickly to identify: surprise, joy, fear, hope, all mingling together. "You don't have to say it back," Persephone continued quickly. "I know it's complicated, and I know we started under terrible circumstances. But I wanted you to know that what I'm feeling is real. that it's grown naturally from spending time with you and learning who you are beneath the title and the power. Persephone, Hades said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I have loved you since before I brought you here. What started as admiration and desire has grown into something far deeper. You have transformed my realm, brought light into darkness, and given me hope for a future I thought I would face alone. If you can find it in your heart to love me despite how we began, then I am the most fortunate of all the gods. He reached for her then, cupping her face in both hands, and Persephone leaned into his touch. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a kiss that spoke of devotion and patience and the willingness to build something lasting rather than simply taking what he wanted. She kissed him back with equal tenderness, pouring into that kiss all the complicated feelings she had developed over these months, all the fear and anger that had transformed into understanding and affection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily, and Persephone felt as though something fundamental had shifted in the universe. They were truly partners now, bound not just by divine law or the effects of pomegranate seeds, but by genuine emotion and mutual choice. So you see, she said, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment,
I suppose this means we're married after all.
If you wish to call it that, Hades said, smiling, though I rather prefer partners in eternity or co-rulers bound by choice as well as fate. How about we just stick with in love and figure out the rest as we go? Persephone suggested. That sounds perfect, Hades agreed. The remaining months until spring passed with remarkable speed. Persephone continued her work in the underworld, now with the added satisfaction of knowing that she was building something lasting with someone she genuinely cared for. She and Hades established routines and rituals that were theirs alone, private moments of connection amidst the public duties of rulership. But as the spring equinox approached, Persephone found herself growing anxious. She would have to leave soon, return to the world above and face her mother for the first time since their confrontation. Part of her was eager to see Demeter again, to feel the sun on her face and walk through living meadows. But another part dreaded the departure, feared leaving behind what she had built in the underworld, worried that Hades might doubt her commitment to return. You will come back, Hades said one evening, reading her thoughts with the ease of long familiarity.
I know you will.
This is your home now as much as the world above is, and I will be here, waiting for you, counting the days until autumn brings you back to me. 6 months is a long time, Persephone said. It is an eternity and an eye blink, both, Hades replied. But we are gods. We have learned patience, if nothing else. And knowing that you will return, that this separation is temporary rather than permanent, makes it bearable. Will you visit me? Persephone asked.
In the world above?
Or are you truly bound to the underworld completely? I can leave for brief periods, Hades said. Though it is not comfortable for me being in that realm of light and life, but for you I will make the effort. Perhaps once each month I can join you for a day or two, just to remind myself of your face and hear your voice. I would like that, Persephone said, and she meant it. The morning of the spring equinox arrived, marked not by sunrise, for the sun never reached the underworld, but by a shift in the energy of the realm itself. Persephone could feel it, a pulling sensation that drew her toward the world above, the part of her that was still connected to spring and growth, asserting itself after months of dormancy. Hades walked with her to the place where the passage between worlds could be opened, and his usual stern composure was cracked by visible sadness. He took both her hands in his, holding them as though he could physically prevent her departure. 6 months. He said, we will have 6 months apart, and then you will return to me.
Promise me you will return. I promise, Persephone said. I love you, Hades. I love this realm. I love the work we do here and the life we're building together.
I will return when autumn comes, and then we will have another 6 months together. and so it will be for all eternity, Hades said. You departing and returning, the seasons turning with your movement between worlds. It is a strange fate we have created for ourselves. It is our fate, Persephone said, chosen by us, shaped by our decisions, and I would not trade it for anything. They kissed then, a kiss of parting that carried all the longing and love and promise of reunion. When they separated, Hades opened the passage with a gesture, and light flooded into the underworld, warm and golden and so bright after months of darkness that Persephone had to shield her eyes. Go, Hades said softly, bring spring to the world. Let your mother know joy again, and when the time comes, return to me. Persephone stepped through the passage and emerged into a world transformed. Where there had been barren wasteland when she departed, now there was the first hint of growth, tiny green shoots pushing through soil that had been dead for months. The sky above was clear and blue, and the sun hung in it like a golden promise, its warmth falling upon her face with an intensity that made her gasp. She took a deep breath of air that smelled of life and possibility, and she felt power flowing through her, the aspect of herself that was connected to spring and growth surging to the forefront. Where her feet touched the earth, flowers bloomed. Where her breath stirred the air, trees began to bud. She was spring personified, the bringer of life and renewal, and the world responded to her presence with explosive enthusiasm. Demeter appeared before her, materializing from the morning air, with tears streaming down her face. But these were tears of joy rather than sorrow, and when she embraced Persephone, her hug was tight but not crushing, loving but not possessive. My daughter, Demeter whispered, my beautiful daughter, you've come home. For 6 months, Persephone reminded her gently.
And then I returned to the underworld. I know, Demeter said, and there was acceptance in her voice, if not happiness. I know.
But for now, you are here, and that is enough. Come, let us restore the world together, mother and daughter working as we once did. And so they did. Persephone moved across the earth, and wherever she walked, life bloomed. Flowers burst into existence, their colors bright after the grey months of winter. Trees erupted with new leaves, their branches heavy with buds that would become fruit. Fields that had lain fallow sprouted with grain, and the promise of harvest hung in the air. Like a blessing, mortals emerged from their homes, gaunt from the winter's famine but alive, and they saw the goddess of spring walking among them. They offered prayers of gratitude and sacrifices of what little they had, and Persephone accepted these offerings with grace, blessing them with fertility and abundance for the coming growing season. She and Demeter fell into a new rhythm, one that acknowledged Persephone's independence while still honoring their relationship. They worked together, but not in the old pattern of mother directing and daughter obeying. Instead, they collaborated as equals, each bringing their own expertise and perspective to the task of nurturing the earth. And when they disagreed, as they sometimes did, they discussed and negotiated rather than Demeter simply imposing her will. It was not perfect. There were difficult moments, times when Demeter's old possessiveness surfaced, or when Persephone's new assertiveness came across as rejection. But they were both trying, both learning how to have a relationship that was more balanced and mature than what had existed before. And as promised, Hades visited. Once each month, he would emerge from the underworld for a brief time, and he and Persephone would walk together through the blooming fields, talking about their respective work and the time they had spent apart. These visits were bittersweet, too short to satisfy but long enough to sustain them through the weeks of separation. Demeter tolerated these visits with visible difficulty, but she tolerated them nonetheless. She could see how Persephone lit up in Hades' presence, could hear the love in her daughter's voice when she spoke of the underworld and the work she did there. And gradually, grudgingly, she began to accept that her daughter's happiness was tied to both worlds now, not just the one she had been born into. The months passed, marked by the flourishing of spring into summer and the gradual transition toward autumn. Persephone felt the pull of the underworld growing stronger as the equinox approached, the part of herself that was queen of the dead calling her back to her duties and her partner. She helped with the harvest, ensuring that mortals would have enough stored food to survive the winter that her absence would bring. And then she said her goodbyes to Demeter. "I will miss you," Demeter said, and this time there was no manipulation in the words, only honest emotion. "These months have been precious to me, having you here, working beside you. But I understand that you must go. The underworld needs you, and—"
"He needs you too." Thank you, Mother," Persephone said, embracing her.
"I'll return in spring, and we'll do this all over again. For all eternity, we'll have this rhythm, this dance between worlds. It's not what either of us would have chosen, but it's ours." "Yes," Demeter agreed. "It's ours." Persephone returned to the underworld as autumn claimed the world above, and Hades was waiting for her exactly where she had left him 6 months before. He swept her into his arms with uncharacteristic abandon, and she laughed with pure joy at being home, for she realized that was what the underworld had become for her. Home. As much as the world above, perhaps more in some ways because here she was not Demeter's daughter or a goddess defined by her season. Here she was simply Persephone, queen and partner, loved for who she was rather than what she represented. "Welcome home," Hades said against her hair. "It's good to be back," Persephone replied. "I've missed you."
"I've missed this place. I've missed the work we do together. And I have missed you beyond measure," Hades said.
"The underworld functioned in your absence, but it did not thrive. You bring something to this realm that cannot be replaced or replicated.
Light in the darkness, hope in death.
Love in a place that has never known it before." "Then let's make up for lost time," Persephone said, smiling. "Show me everything that's happened while I was gone. Tell me about the souls you've processed, the judgments you've made, the problems that need solving. We have 6 months to work together before I have to leave again, and I intend to make the most of every moment." And so they did. They fell back into their partnership with ease, as though the 6 months of separation had never occurred. They worked side by side, ruling the underworld with wisdom and compassion, constantly finding new ways to improve the experience of the souls under their care. They created new gardens and new programs, established new rituals and refined old ones, always seeking to honor the dead while maintaining justice and order. Their love deepened during these months together, moving from the initial rush of new attraction to something more solid and enduring. They had their disagreements, certainly, and their different perspectives sometimes led to conflicts. But they had learned to communicate, to listen to each other, to compromise when necessary, and stand firm when important. They were partners in the truest sense, neither dominant nor submissive, but equal in authority and respect. And, as winter claimed the world above, as Demeter's grief made itself known in cold winds and frozen ground, Persephone did not feel guilt as she once might have. Her mother's sorrow was real, but it was also her mother's choice, her way of processing the separation that their new arrangement demanded. The mortals would survive the winter, would learn to prepare and adapt, and they would know that spring would come again when Persephone returned to the surface. This was the new rhythm of the cosmos, the dance of seasons born from a daughter's choice and a mother's grief, from love found in unexpected places and independence hard won. It was not simple or easy, but it was theirs, and in its complexity lay a truth that resonated through all the worlds. Life and death were not opposites, but partners, each giving meaning to the other.
Light and darkness needed each other to exist.
And love, true love, could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. transforming not just individuals, but entire realms. Persephone stood with Hades in the highest tower of his palace, looking out over the vast expanse of the underworld, and she felt complete in a way she never had before. She was goddess of spring and queen of the dead, daughter and wife, life-bringer and psychopomp. She contained multitudes, bridged contradictions, existed simultaneously in two realms and two roles. What are you thinking?
Hades asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Persephone said.
And that in 6 months, when I return to the world above, I'll be exactly where I'm supposed to be then too. I'm not divided, Hades. I'm multiplied. I am more than I was because I am part of both worlds now. You are extraordinary, Hades said softly, and I am more fortunate than I have any right to be that you chose to give me a chance, that you saw past my mistakes to the being beneath. We are fortunate in each other, Persephone corrected. And we will continue to be for all eternity, through all the turnings of the seasons, through all the cycles of death and rebirth, through all the ages to come. This is our story, Hades. The story of how death found love and how spring learned to thrive in darkness. And it is only beginning. Below them, the underworld thrummed with life of its own, souls moving through their eternal journeys, rivers flowing according to their ancient purposes, gardens blooming in defiance of the absence of sun. And above them, though they could not see it from where they stood, the world changed with the seasons. Winter yielding to spring, yielding to summer, yielding to autumn, in an endless cycle tied to Persephone's movements between the realms. It was not the fate either of them would have chosen at the beginning, but it was the fate they had made together, shaped by their choices and their courage and their willingness to see beyond the obvious to the possibilities that lay beneath. And as they stood together, goddess and god, queen and king, partners in eternity, they knew with certainty that they had found something rare and precious. They had found home in each other, and that was enough.